Hey guys, it's Ornlu, and this is going to be a bit of an AoE mechanics video where we jump into Oysters and Foxes, the two new gold sources in AoE2. We're going to check out to see, okay, how good are they, what benefits do they have, what bonuses and technologies apply to them, and so on, because they're both a little bit weird. Oysters have been in the game for a while since the Chronicles expansion, but recent tournaments have actually started including them in regular, AoE2 DE multiplayer maps. So we are going to be taking a bit of a look as to see, okay, how exactly do they work, how good are they, and so forth. Foxes have been added into the game just recently in, literally the most recent patch, and people really don't know what's going on with these little critters just yet, so we're going to take a look at those as well. So, shouldn't be too long of a video, but still a couple topics here that are semi-related that I still think are worth covering. So, let's start with Oysters, as we have our nice little setup here. So, we can see the work rate, the fishing ship here, but it is kind of bugged, or I don't know if it's bugged, but it always shows 16.8, which is the speed that you gather from shorefish. You actually gather from both fish traps and especially deep fish faster, but it still is going to be largely correct for everybody else. So, oysters here, 450 gold on them compared to the gold mine's 800, so a lot less gold on the oysters than on the gold mine. The gold from the oysters can be gathered by both villagers and fishing ships, depending on what is traversable, although the oysters are always in water or shallows. Let's just go ahead and see what is going on here. So I click on the dock and everybody is getting to work. So first, the fishing ships, or actually in the recent patch they added the correct nomenclature, so it's actually an oystering ship, has a work rate of 24, which is pretty good. If we look at the villager here on the gold mine, it's 22.8. This is just a written villager with no upgrades. So the base gold rate is 22.8, 24 for the oystering ship. The issue is, although the oystering ship is a little bit faster, most of the time the oysters are kind of far off, and far away from the dock, at least in the multiplayer maps that we've seen oysters implemented in so far, like Comir and Seychelles, and that one from Warlords that had like the land in the middle, and there's like a river, and then there's like a bay. That one had oysters too. So the oysters generally are not going to be as efficient from fishing ships as gold miners are when, mining gold with a villager, because you always have the mining camp right next to the gold mines, or at least, most of the time. Whereas with the oysters, they tend to be further away. This is really just a best case scenario, and I'll show you some of the maps, I guess I can, in a little bit. That said, when gold starts to run low, this is another 450 gold you can take, and some gold is better than no gold. Now, if you look at it with the villager, you can see Oyster Gatherer here, it's 22.8, so it's the exact same as mining gold. So that's pretty nifty there. Villagers, it's just, easy to remember, mining from the oysters is the same as mining from gold. So slightly slower than a fishing ship, but not by much. And if you can, get the villager as close as possible, then that's going to be great. Also, villagers can obviously drop off the oyster gold at the docks, as you're seeing there. So, what about upgrades? So, first things first, let's get the gold mining upgrade. Okay, so you can see with the gold mining upgrade, and this is also true of gold shaft mining, we're now at 26.22 work rate on the gold mining villager. That is not the case for the oyster gatherer. So, the oyster gatherers are not affected by the mining camp upgrades. And in fact, there is no way to increase the oyster gatherer efficiency. Note that the fishing ship is also still at 24 for the work rate, so the gold mining upgrades do not affect the fishing ships gathering from oysters. However, if I bump us up to the castle age, we can go ahead and research gill nets. And with gill nets in, you can see that it actually has been improved for the oystering ships, and that you're now at 28.8, which is obviously quite decent and is going to be useful if you plan on gathering from oysters. That said, the oyster gatherer is still at 22.8, so not the greatest. If you have the choice between oysters and gold miners, just use the gold miners. You can see with gold shaft mining, you can get it up to 30 for the work rate, and then it's still 22.8 for the oyster gatherers. Oysters, to me, really feel like more of a late game thing when gold starts to run low, or if you want early on to send your fishing ships who are initially gathering from, say, your deep fish to help you click up to feudal age, then you can shift those fishing ships over to oysters to get a little bit of gold income. Remember, it's not super efficient, but you don't need to invest a mining camp into it. So there are some tight builds that you can do on oyster maps where you do want to gather from the oysters early on, but I would still, more often than not, say, okay, you're probably better off using the fishing ships to gather from deep fish, because that's just going to be the most, or that's going to be the fastest work rate, is them gathering from deep fish. And in fact, as far as like regular workers go, Japanese fishing ships with full upgrades are actually the fastest working gatherer in AoE2, even faster than Mongol hunters, which are the second fastest. Now, I was going to do a side-by-side comparison to show you off the different bonuses, but for some reason, the AI in DE just does not like it when you have fishing ships. So I can't actually use consistent like triggers or anything to make fishing ships work at different times. So I'm going to have to do things a little bit more manually and just switch my own civ around constantly. So let's go ahead and see what different civ bonuses are going to affect the oysters. All right, so first we're going to test Turks, who remember, gold miners work 20% faster. So if we send everyone to work here, you can see that the gold miner is indeed working faster, so 27.36. But the oyster gatherer, unfortunately, is not working any faster. And you bet I have complained to Forgotten Empires about this, because in my mind, it absolutely goes against all fun and spirit of AoE2 to not have Turk oysterers work faster. It's really, really disappointing. But no, alas, the Turk oyster gatherers are the same rate as every other civ. Also, it does not affect their fishing ships in any way, so that is still the same 24 gather rate. So only gold miners for the Turk bonus. Well, how about the Japanese? They do have the tankier and faster working fishing ships for what that's worth, so it says they work faster. Does that include the oyster gatherers? And you can see here, yes, it does. So we're in the feudal age, so it should be working 10% faster. That is exactly what we are seeing here, or working at 26.4, when the default work rate for the oyster gatherers or the oystering ships is 24. So yes, the Japanese bonus does affect fishing ships, which makes sense because gill nets also affects the oyster gatherers. So Japanese are still going to be a bit better in that regard. Obviously, it doesn't affect the villagers gathering from the oysters. So Japanese, they do have an applicable bonus here. The Romans have 5% faster gathering villagers. How about for oysters? You betcha, 23.94, 23.94, so it does affect the villagers gathering from the oysters, but note that it's still at 24 work rate for the oystering ship, so the villagers are gathering faster, but the fishing ships are not. So, Romans, yes, you actually do gather from the oysters a little bit faster. Georgians, when working under a fortified church, remember you do have a 10% faster gather rate? Yeah, there you go, 10% work rate. So, how about that one? You can see here, yes, 25.08 does not affect the fishing ships and never has. So, Georgians can also gather from oysters faster if you are working under the aura of a fortified church. So far, as far as villagers goes, it's just Romans and Georgians who have the faster work rate. How about the Malians? Remember, they have villagers drop off 10% more gold. This one, I'm just going to do manually so that we can get a bit of a better idea. So the work rate says it's exactly the same. This is one of those instances where DE's, I guess, tooltips can be a little bit confusing. Because I can show you guys here, it still says 22.8, but with the way the bonus works out is that it basically takes the same time for a generic civilization to gather 10 gold as it does for the Malians to gather 11 gold. And you can see here that, yes, it does actually apply. So we have only depleted this oyster pile of 10 gold, rather, and we've dropped off 11, and it's in the same exact time it would take a generic villager to gather 10. So the villagers drop off 10% more gold. It does apply to the Malians. So they're another civ that can benefit from villagers gathering from oysters. Fishing ships are completely unchanged, though, as, again, it does not... The bonus is very specifically villagers. It does not include fishing ships. And the final civ that I could think of that would have any sort of interaction with the oysters is going to be the Mayans. What about this? Because this is just resources last 15% longer. So would it apply to the fishing ship oysters, oysterers, or the villager ones, or what have you? So I'll try and time this appropriately. Okay, we'll wait till this oyster ship all has its 15, and then we'll stop. Okay, so we dropped off 10 gold there. Note that the oyster pile has gone from 450 gold to 441.5 gold, technically. So yes, the longer-lasting resources for Mayans does apply to the villagers gathering from the oysters. For the fishing ships, it is the same exact deal. So instead of the 15 gold that it would be taken off normally, putting it at 435, we're at 437, which means you do have that 15% longer-lasting resource bonus. Although Mayans tend to have slightly slower work rate for their villagers to sort of compensate for that, but it still works out to being a nice bonus. As far as I can tell, Mayans, Georgians under a fortified church, Malians, and Romans are the civilizations that are going to benefit from, in some way, shape, or form, also Japanese fishing ships, from the advantages of getting those oyster patches. However, I just want to show you guys that, for instance, this is the map Kumir, which is going to be used in the upcoming Lingyan Cup. We already saw the qualifiers on it. You can see that the oysters, generally speaking, are kind of far away from the docks. These ones are kind of close. Those are likely going to be a little bit further away. Those are obviously pretty far away. So you can see that even though the gather rate is slightly faster, it seems like map developers, generally speaking, keep the oysters at least a little bit further away from the shoreline. That said, if you build a dock here, I've already seen builds where people will send their fishing ships early to the gold so that you don't have to build a gold mine, or rather a mining camp on the gold with your actual villagers. Another map that's like that is Seychelles, and that is going to be kind of a similar deal. You can see the oysters are very far away from the coastline on this one. So it's still more efficient most of the time to focus on gathering gold, but as we've seen on maps, games on this map that go late, having the extra little bit of gold can be quite invaluable. So those are oysters in a nutshell. Just a little nice, I guess, tool that has been added to map makers, and it's a secondary source of gold, I would say, in most situations. Nice to have, but at least I haven't really seen it be the focal point of any map thus far. All right, foxes. So foxes were added in the most recent of the patches, and they just kind of came out of left field. They're just these little critters that run around. You can push them with your scout cavalry, and I can even do so with this villager. But they have 35 gold on them. However, you don't actually need to drop off the gold. They work like Khmer farms. So if I can just chase this guy down, punch it down in one hit, they don't fight back, and then you can just immediately start gathering gold. And on top of that, 60 gather rate for these villagers, absolute nuking every other source of food income in the game. Like, that's a little under double a Mongol hunter, which is just over 30 food per minute. So this is an enormous work rate for the villagers. There is decay associated with the foxes, so we only gathered 31 of the 35 total gold. And they have been added to Arena, I've seen them on. I don't think I've seen them on Arabia yet. But again, it's another tool that map makers now have access to that we might see sprinkled into tournaments or even ladder maps over time. So you can just, like, you know, have your villager out, you go take the fox really, really fast, and then you just get that extra 30-ish gold added to your stockpile. Now, I can tell you guys right now that foxes and fox gatherers, although I think they say hunter, right? No, they actually still just say villager. So although, yeah, they look like hunters, they are not impacted by any civ bonus that would be associated with, you know, gathering food faster or gold faster, hunt or anything like that. So the Mongols here, they don't gather from the foxes any faster, which is okay because the foxes already gather super fast. You can see 31 gold still. In another instance of the, I guess, in-game tooltip description not being the most helpful, you can see that although the Georgian villager shows an increased work rate here, it actually isn't any faster. The fox still actually goes down at the exact same rate as normal. So this includes Georgians and Romans who have these more general villager buffs. They still don't apply here to the fox gatherers. You can see that even though we had the 10% faster work rate, we're still only ending up with 31 gold, which indicates we took it in exactly the same time as every other civ. So this, unfortunately, is going to be where the game tooltips lie to you. So, do foxes interact with any bonuses in the game? Well, yes, they do. And of course, one of them is actually going to be the Jurchens. So you can see we've got the Jurchens here. Come back, little fox. And if the Jurchen bonus is applied properly, where we have meat of hunted and livestock animals doesn't decay, that means we should get all 35 gold from this fox. And indeed we do. See, 35 gold collected. So the Jurchens do get, I guess, 4 extra gold per villager for fox. As for other bonuses, it does apply to the Mayans and to the Malians as well, with their longer lasting or more efficient gold miners. And we can see here that I accidentally have the architecture set to Malay, but we're actually Mayans here, and you can see with the longer lasting resources that we're going to end up getting, like, what, 33-ish gold, I think, from the fox instead of the 31 gold of basically every other civ. Actually, we did get 35 in total, so the 15% is enough to bump us all the way up to 35 gold as well. So nicely done there for the Mayans. And lastly, we have the Malians, who are also going to benefit from their more efficient gold miners. So we should be getting, what, so 10% of 35 is 3.5, so we should be getting 38 gold-ish in the same amount of time as it would take a generic villager to get 35 gold. Although it's going to be slightly off because of decay. Yeah, so I guess it's because of decay, we end up at 34 gold total. So I guess it's the 31 gold plus 10% of that. Don't know how the math works out, but you can see Malians still get a little bit more gold, although not quite as much as Mayans and Jurchens. Anyway, that's really all there is to foxes. They don't really interact with all that much. There is no like upgrade you can research to have your villagers gather from foxes faster. So they're just a little thing that have been added for map makers on certain maps. I've already seen arena trushes because I can show you guys here. If you haven't played Ladder Arena yet on the new patch, they've added foxes onto a bunch of the different maps. You can see there are some foxes right there. So what we've seen players do already is you can go for the tower rush and then take that extra little bit of gold along the way so you can start making archers a little bit faster. Haven't really seen it applied to other maps yet, but I'm sure they're in there and we'll just sort of see more of that over time, especially as for tournaments and whatnot, map makers will go ahead and experiment with the new fauna that have been added to DE. Anyway, guys, that's going to be it for this little bit of a deep dive, a little bit of a deep dive into the Oysters and the Foxes, the two new sources of gold income that we are going to be seeing more regularly in competitive maps. Hope you all enjoyed, and definitely let me know what you think of these in the comments. I like the Oysters. I think they give you a little bit of a different dynamic, especially on water maps. The Foxes, I'm not too sold on yet. They feel a little weird to me, just because they don't gather like hunt, and you don't need to drop them off, the gold off, is unlike everything else that you use from hunt. They're still a little weird to me. Oysters I like, though, so let me know in the comments what you guys think of these. And of course, a shout out to my Patreon supporters, with Dan and Jared in the Great Wolf tier, and then Carolyn, Dieter, Liquid Egg Product, Rairu, and Tandoori Knight in the Dire Wolf tier. But thank you guys all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.